The streets of London were filled with the sound of cars and people moving quickly. It was a bright morning and everyone seemed busy. At the same time, inside the famous Buckingham Palace, a special visit was being prepared. A well-known talk show host named Whoopi was coming with her team to film a short cultural segment for her show. She was famous for her laughter, quick humor, and positive energy. Wherever she went, she made people smile. Whoopi had always loved traveling to new places and learning about different traditions, but she also had a funny way of seeing things. She often made jokes about serious situations without meaning to offend anyone. On this trip, she was excited to see the famous royal guards for the first time. She had seen them on television many times, but never in real life. When her car stopped in front of the tall gates of the palace, she looked out and gasped softly. The building looked grand and beautiful, shining under the morning sun. The guards in their red uniforms stood straight as arrows, holding their rifles perfectly still. Their tall black hats made them look even more serious. As Whoopi stepped out of the car, she smiled and whispered to her assistant, "Look at them. They don't even blink." Her voice was playful and her assistant chuckled. They began to walk closer to the courtyard where a few guards stood like statues. Whoopi had a natural curiosity, so she decided to test just how disciplined these guards really were. She waved her hand near one guard's face, but he did not move even a little. She giggled and turned to her camera crew. "This is amazing. I've met actors who can't hold a straight face for 2 seconds. But this man could win an award for being the calmest person in the world." The camera crew laughed quietly, trying not to make too much noise. One of them said, "You should try to make him laugh, Whoopi." She smiled and said, "Oh, I could do that easily." She stood beside the guard and made a funny pose for the camera, pretending to be one herself. "Do I look as serious as him?" she asked. Her team burst into laughter. The royal guard, however, did not move an inch. His eyes stayed focused and his posture stayed perfect. It was clear he took his duty seriously. A few tourists nearby stopped to watch the scene. Some found it funny while others looked uncomfortable, not sure if it was the right thing to laugh at. The palace tour guide, a polite British woman, softly said, "Miss Whoopi, please remember the guards are on duty. They are trained to stay still and silent no matter what happens around them." Whoopi smiled kindly and said, "Oh, I understand. I'm just amazed by their focus. It's impressive." Just then, another man in a decorated uniform walked toward the group. He was older, with calm eyes and a gentle but firm presence. He was the commanding officer of the guard team. He bowed slightly and said, "Good morning, madam. I hope you are enjoying your visit." Whoopi nodded, still smiling. "Yes, it's beautiful here. I was just curious about how these guards can stay still like that." "It's unbelievable," the officer nodded. "They are trained for years to serve with discipline. Every movement, every breath is part of their duty. Silence and patience are part of their strength." His words made Whoopi pause. She looked again at the guard beside her. Suddenly, he didn't seem just like a silent soldier, but like someone carrying deep respect for his country and his role. Her smile softened. "That's actually quite inspiring," she said quietly. The officer gave a small smile and replied, "Discipline is not about ignoring joy. It is about honoring responsibility." The guard may not respond, but he still hears every sound, sees every movement, and stays true to his purpose. Whoopi nodded thoughtfully. "That's powerful. I think I understand now." The officer gently gestured for them to continue the tour. As they walked inside, Whoopi whispered to her assistant, "He's right. Discipline isn't just about standing still. It's about staying strong even when everything around you is trying to make you move." Her assistant smiled and said, "Maybe that's why they call it royal discipline." Whoopi laughed softly. "Maybe I should learn some of that." As they entered the grand halls of the palace, her earlier laughter faded into quiet admiration. For the first time that day, she wasn't the one entertaining others. Instead, she was learning a lesson about calmness, respect, and strength without words. As Whoopi and her team entered the grand palace hallway, the sound of their footsteps echoed softly across the marble floor. The walls were decorated with large paintings of kings, queens, and battles from the past. The tour guide walked ahead, explaining the history of the place, but Whoopi's mind was still on the royal guard she had just seen outside. His calm face and still body kept returning to her thoughts. Her assistant noticed her quiet mood and asked, "You look serious now. Are you thinking about what that officer said?" Whoopi nodded slowly. Yes, he said discipline is not about ignoring joy, but about honoring responsibility. That's such a deep thought. I talk for a living, but that man said more in one sentence than I say in a whole show. Her assistant smiled. Maybe silence really is powerful. They reached the grand staircase that led to the royal gallery. As they climbed, Whoopi saw portraits of the royal guards through the years. Their uniforms had changed a little, but their posture and expression stayed the same. Each guard looked proud and calm. There was something special about the quiet strength in their eyes. When they reached the gallery, the officer who had spoken to her earlier appeared again. He seemed calm as ever, walking with his hands behind his back. "I see you are enjoying the tour," he said politely. Whoopi smiled. "Yes, but I think I'm enjoying the learning part even more. Your guards are incredible. I don't think I've ever seen that kind of focus before." The officer nodded. "It takes years to build. Many people believe silence is emptiness, but it is full of meaning. When a guard stands still, he is saying 1,000 words through his silence. His stillness shows respect, strength, and trust." Whoopi thought about it carefully. She had spent her whole career talking, laughing, and entertaining. But this kind of quiet power was new to her. She said, "I wish people on my show could learn that. Everyone talks at the same time. No one listens." The officer smiled. "Listening is harder than speaking. The guard listens to everything around him without reacting. That is how he stays aware and calm. It is a skill we all can learn." Whoopi nodded again. "You're right. I think silence takes more strength than words." Just then, a young guard in training walked by carrying his helmet. He accidentally dropped his glove, and before he could bend down to pick it up, the officer turned to him and said gently, "Hold your posture first." The young man straightened his back immediately, then carefully picked up his glove while keeping his shoulders firm. Whoopi watched the moment closely. It was simple but full of meaning. She whispered to her assistant, "Even small actions matter to them. They train to be perfect in every detail." The officer turned to her and said kindly, "Discipline begins with small habits. Once you master the small things, the big ones follow easily." Whoopi smiled. "That's true in life too. If people took care of the little things, maybe big problems wouldn't even come." The officer looked impressed. "You speak like a teacher yourself, madam." She laughed lightly. "Maybe I just learned from one." The group continued through the palace, visiting rooms filled with royal history. Whoopi's camera team filmed everything, but she seemed less focused on the show now and more interested in what she was learning. She kept asking thoughtful questions about the guards' daily routines, their schedule, and what motivated them. The officer explained that guards trained in both body and mind. They learned to stay calm during noise, to keep their minds steady when things around them were not. "It is not just about guarding a building," he said. "It is about guarding the values that stand behind it." Whoopi listened carefully. "So it's not just a job. It's like a promise." "Yes," the officer replied with a nod. "A promise to stay loyal, respectful, and strong even when no one is watching." His words touched Whoopi deeply. She thought about how she always lived in front of cameras, surrounded by people. She had never thought much about silence, but now it felt like something she needed to understand. When the tour ended, the officer bowed politely. "I hope you enjoyed your visit." Whoopi smiled warmly. "I did. You taught me more than I expected. I came here for a show, but I think I found a lesson." The officer gave a gentle smile. "Lessons are everywhere, madam. We just have to stay still long enough to see them." As Whoopi walked out of the palace, the wind brushed softly against her face. For the first time, she didn't talk. She just looked around quietly, feeling the peace that silence could bring. The next day, Whoopi returned to her hotel room in central London. Her mind was still full of thoughts about the royal guards. The quiet strength she had witnessed stayed with her like an echo. As she looked out of her window at the busy London streets below, she thought about how different the world outside was from the peaceful discipline she saw inside the palace. Her assistant, Mark, entered the room holding a tablet. "Whoopi, the producers back home are asking if you're ready to record a short interview about your visit," he said. Whoopi nodded but looked thoughtful. "Yes, but I want to talk about something real this time. Not just about the palace walls or the decorations. I want to talk about the people behind that silence." Mark raised his eyebrows. "You mean the guards?" "Yes," Whoopi said with a small smile. "Everyone sees them as quiet statues, but they are full of lessons. Yesterday, that officer told me something I can't forget. He said, "Silence speaks when respect listens." It keeps playing in my mind. Mark smiled. That's deep. It's different from what people expect from a comedy show. Whoopi laughed softly. Then maybe it's time to give them something unexpected. Later that day, she went to a local television studio to record her travel segment. The room was filled with bright lights, cameras, and staff moving quickly. The cheerful energy of the place was very different from the calm of the palace. When Whoopi walked onto the set, everyone greeted her warmly. She smiled but carried a calmness that surprised even her team. When the camera light turned red, signaling that the show had started, Whoopi began with her usual humor. "So I went to visit Buckingham Palace yesterday," she said in her lively tone, "and I met the most serious people in the world, the royal guards. They don't smile, they don't move, and I think they can stand still longer than any statue." The audience laughed, and she smiled too. But then she paused and continued in a softer voice. "At first I thought it was funny. I even tried to make one laugh, and of course he didn't move at all. But then something happened that changed the way I saw them." The audience grew quiet. They were used to hearing jokes, not reflections. She continued, "A commanding officer came up to me and told me something that I can't stop thinking about. He said, 'Discipline is not about ignoring joy, it's about honoring duty.' And I realized he was right. Those guards aren't just standing there for show. They're symbols of respect and focus. They're showing the world that strength isn't always loud." The audience listened closely. The cameraman, the crew, even the sound engineer stopped moving for a moment. Whoopi looked calm, her voice steady but full of feeling. She added, "We live in a world full of noise. Everyone talks, everyone argues, and sometimes we forget to listen. But those guards taught me that silence can say more than words if it comes from the heart." There was a short silence in the studio, then a wave of gentle applause. People weren't just clapping for her story, they were moved by the message behind it. After the show ended, Mark came to her and said, "You really changed the tone today. The crew said it was one of the best segments you've ever done." Whoopi smiled. "Maybe because it was real. I didn't have to make people laugh this time, I just had to make them think." As they walked out of the studio, one of the British staff members stopped her politely. "Ma'am, your story about the guards was wonderful. My father used to serve in that unit. He would have loved hearing what you said." Whoopi smiled warmly. "Then that means I honored them well." That evening, she received dozens of messages online from viewers who had watched the show. Many said they never looked at the royal guards the same way again. Some said the story reminded them of the value of patience and discipline in their own lives. Whoopi read every message carefully, feeling thankful. She turned to Mark and said, "I think those guards gave me more than a story. They gave me something to share with the world." Mark nodded. "And maybe they'll hear it too." Whoopi smiled. "I hope so. I'd love to thank them in person again." As she looked out of the window that night, the city lights sparkled like stars. The same streets that seemed noisy and restless now looked peaceful to her. She realized that peace was not about where you were, but about what you carried inside. The next morning, Whoopi woke up early. Sunlight was coming through the curtains of her hotel room, and she felt peaceful. She stretched her arms and smiled, thinking about how the audience had reacted to her story the previous night. The quiet message about the royal guards had touched many people. For once, her show wasn't just funny, it was meaningful. While she was having breakfast, her assistant Mark entered the room with his phone in hand. His face showed excitement. "Whoopi," he said quickly, "you won't believe this. We just got a message from the royal office." Whoopi looked surprised. "From the palace?" "Yes," Mark replied, smiling. "They saw your interview. The officer you spoke with yesterday sent a message through the press team. He said the royal staff appreciated your kind words about their discipline and respect. And guess what? They're inviting you back for a private meeting with the guards." Whoopi put down her cup of tea and smiled widely. "That's amazing. I didn't expect that at all. I only spoke from my heart." Mark nodded. "I think they noticed that. They said they'd like you to visit the barracks where the guards train. They want to show you how their discipline is built from the beginning. Whoopi felt excited but also a little nervous. That sounds like something special. Let's accept the invitation. I want to understand more about what makes them so dedicated. Later that day, a royal car arrived to take her to the barracks near St. James's Park. As she stepped out of the car, she saw rows of guards practicing their movements in perfect sync. Their boots moved in rhythm, their uniforms looked spotless, and their focus was strong. The sound of their footsteps on the ground echoed like music. The same officer from before, named Captain Harris, greeted her with a polite bow. "Welcome back, madam. We are pleased that your message reached so many hearts." Whoopi smiled warmly. "Thank you, Captain. Your men inspired me. People all over the world are talking about them now. I think they taught me something very valuable." Captain Harris nodded. "That is good to hear. Today I will show you how they train. You will see that silence is only one part of discipline. The rest is built through teamwork, patience, and respect." He led her to a training field where new recruits were standing in a line. Each of them held their head high and waited for instructions. The captain called out orders in a firm but calm voice, and the guards followed perfectly. Every step was measured, every turn was exact. Whoopi watched with wide eyes. "It looks simple," she said softly, "but it takes so much control." Captain Harris smiled. "Exactly. It is about small habits done with care every single day." After the drill, he invited her into the classroom where the guards learned about history, manners, and the meaning of their duty. The room was quiet and tidy. On the wall was written a quote that said, "Honor begins with discipline." Whoopi pointed to it. "That's beautiful. Do all of them believe this?" "Yes," Captain Harris said. "We remind them that they are not just guarding a palace. They are representing the respect and values of a whole nation. Their calmness is their strength." Whoopi nodded slowly. She could feel the weight of those words. "I think that's something everyone can learn from. Not just soldiers. Even people like me who live in a world full of noise." The captain looked thoughtful. "Indeed, madam. The world needs both laughter and silence. You bring joy, we bring calm. Both are forms of strength." Whoopi smiled gently. "That's true. Maybe the balance between the two is what makes life complete." Before she left, Captain Harris asked her if she would like to meet the same guard she had teased during her first visit. Whoopi's face lit up. "Yes, please. I'd love to thank him in person." A few minutes later, the guard arrived, still wearing his uniform, his face calm and polite. Whoopi stepped forward and said, "I owe you an apology. When I laughed the other day, I didn't understand what you were doing. Now I do. You taught me something without saying a single word." The guard smiled slightly, which surprised her. "No apology needed, madam," he said kindly. "Sometimes laughter brings understanding faster than silence." Whoopi laughed softly. "You're wiser than I thought. Maybe you should come on my show someday." Captain Harris chuckled. "That would be a first in royal history." They all smiled. The moment was light and warm. As Whoopi looked around one last time, she realized that this place was not just about duty. It was about pride, respect, and quiet courage. When she returned to her car, she said to Mark, "I came here to learn about them, but they taught me about myself." Mark nodded. "That's the best kind of lesson." Whoopi looked out of the window as the car drove away, her heart full of gratitude and peace. The laughter she once used to fill the air now shared space with something even stronger: respect for silence. After returning from the palace barracks, Whoopi couldn't stop thinking about the young guard who had spoken to her. His calm words and gentle smile had stayed in her mind. There was something about the way he spoke, simple but full of meaning. She wanted to know more about his life and what inspired him to choose such a quiet but powerful path. The next morning, while having tea on the hotel balcony, she turned to her assistant Mark and said, "I want to know his story. The guard I met yesterday, he said something that really touched me. Sometimes laughter brings understanding faster than silence." "That line keeps echoing in my mind." Mark nodded. "He sounded wise beyond his years. Maybe he has an interesting background." Should I contact Captain Harris and ask if we can meet him again? Whoopi smiled. Yes, please do. I think his story could inspire many people. A few hours later, they received permission from the palace to interview the guard privately for her show. The royal office agreed as long as it was handled respectfully. Whoopi felt excited. This wasn't just a TV interview. It was a chance to learn about the meaning behind true discipline. Later that afternoon, she returned to the training barracks. The guard named Thomas greeted her politely. He looked calm as always, but more relaxed now that they were meeting outside of his duty hours. They sat in a quiet courtyard where the sound of birds filled the air. Whoopi smiled warmly and said, Thomas, thank you for meeting me. I didn't expect to see you again so soon. Thomas nodded. It's my honor, madam. Captain Harris said you wanted to talk about our work. Yes, she replied softly, but I also want to know about you. You seem very calm and wise for someone your age. How did you learn that kind of peace? Thomas looked thoughtful. It comes from practice, I suppose. I wasn't always calm. When I was younger, I wanted to talk and laugh all the time. But when I joined the guards, I learned that silence can teach you more than words ever could. Whoopi listened carefully. So you chose this job to learn discipline? Thomas smiled slightly. I chose it to serve. My father was also a royal guard. He used to tell me that serving the nation isn't just about standing at a gate. It's about carrying respect for others in your heart. When I was a child, I used to visit him during ceremonies. I would see him stand straight for hours, and I never understood how he did it. Now I do. Whoopi leaned forward, interested. And what did you learn from him? Thomas's eyes softened. He taught me patience. He said, when the world becomes noisy, be the calm in the middle of it. At first I didn't understand, but now I live by that idea every day. Whoopi smiled. That's beautiful. Your father must be proud. Thomas nodded gently. He passed away a few years ago, but I think of him every time I wear this uniform. I feel like he's still standing beside me. Whoopi's heart warmed. That's such a meaningful way to honor him. You're continuing his legacy with grace, Thomas smiled humbly. Thank you, madam. I think everyone has a duty in life no matter what they do. Some guard palaces, others guard happiness like you do through your laughter. Whoopi chuckled softly. I never thought of it that way, but you're right. Maybe that's what connects us. You guard respect through silence, and I spread joy through laughter. Both are needed in the world, Thomas nodded. That's true, madam. Balance makes life beautiful. As they talked, the camera team quietly recorded their conversation. The gentle tone of the interview was unlike any Whoopi had ever done before. There were no jokes or loud laughter, just two people from very different worlds finding meaning in simple words. When the interview ended, Whoopi stood up and said, Thomas, thank you for sharing your story. I think many people will see silence in a new light after hearing you. Thomas smiled politely. And I think they'll smile more after hearing you. They both laughed lightly. It was a small moment, but it carried warmth and mutual respect. As Whoopi left the barracks, she felt deeply moved. She turned to Mark and said, You know, I've interviewed hundreds of famous people in my life, but that young man said more in a few words than most people say in an hour. Mark smiled. Because he speaks from the heart, Whoopi nodded. Yes, and that's the kind of voice the world needs to hear more often. That evening, back at the hotel, she watched the recorded interview again. Every time Thomas spoke, she felt calm. His quiet wisdom made her realize that even in a world full of noise, peace can still be found. She decided then that her next show would not just be about entertainment. It would be about meaning. She wanted people to laugh, but also to think, to feel, and to understand the power of silence and respect. A week later, Whoopi's team finished editing the interview she had recorded with the royal guard, Thomas. The final version looked simple but full of emotion. There was no background music, no jokes, and no special effects. Just a quiet conversation between two people who saw the world differently, but respected each other's way of living. When Whoopi watched the full episode for the first time, she felt a wave of peace wash over her. The scene where Thomas spoke about his father touched her heart deeply. His calm voice, his humble smile, and the way he spoke about patience all carried a message the world needed to hear. Her assistant Mark entered the room and asked, So, what do you think? Whoopi smiled softly. It's perfect. No edits needed. Let's air it just like this. Mark looked a little unsure. It's different from your usual show. There's no comedy here, no big laughs. Are you sure the audience will like it? Whoopi nodded. If something is real, people will feel it. Laughter brings joy, but truth brings connection. This story is real, and that's what makes it beautiful. The next day, the episode aired on her talk show's special travel segment. The title was simple: The Guard Who Spoke Without Words. From the very first minute, viewers could feel the sincerity. Whoopi introduced Thomas to the audience by saying, "He may not be a celebrity, but his silence taught me more than words ever could." As the interview played, millions of viewers across different countries watched quietly. Thomas spoke about his training, his father, and the meaning of discipline. His line about being the calm in the middle of the noise became the highlight of the show. By the end of the episode, many people were moved to tears. The comment section under the online upload filled with messages. Some viewers wrote that the story reminded them of their own parents who taught them patience. Others said they realized that silence was not weakness but strength. Within a day, the video reached millions of views. News outlets began sharing clips from the episode, calling it one of the most heart-touching moments on television. The palace also released a statement appreciating Whoopi's respectful approach and the way she presented the royal guards. At the studio, Mark entered Whoopi's office with a big smile. "You did it again," he said. "But this time it's different. It's not just about laughter, it's about emotion. People everywhere are talking about how this story made them think." Whoopi smiled gently. "I'm glad. I didn't plan to teach anyone. I just wanted to share what I learned. Sometimes the best lessons are the ones you don't expect." A few hours later, she received a call from Captain Harris at the palace. "Madam, on behalf of our team, I want to thank you," he said kindly. "You showed the world the human side of our guards. You helped people see beyond the uniform." Whoopi replied with a warm tone, "Thank you, Captain. Your guards taught me that silence has a voice of its own. I only shared what they showed me." Before ending the call, Captain Harris said, "Thomas's father would have been proud. His story reached places even we couldn't imagine." That line made Whoopi pause for a moment. She felt grateful for being a part of something meaningful. After the call, she sat quietly in her dressing room, thinking about how one small moment of laughter outside the palace had turned into something much bigger, a story that touched hearts all over the world. Later that night, she joined a live video call with her audience. People from different countries joined to talk about what the episode meant to them. One viewer said, "I used to think silence was just emptiness, but now I see it as a kind of strength." Another said, "I showed this episode to my children to teach them about patience." Whoopi smiled throughout the conversation. She didn't need to make jokes or fill the air with words. Her listeners were speaking from the heart, and that was enough. When the call ended, Mark said quietly, "You always said laughter changes people, but this time silence did." Whoopi looked thoughtful. Maybe both can work together. Laughter opens hearts and silence fills them. As she looked out of the window at the city lights, she felt proud but humble. The world was still noisy, but for one brief moment she had helped everyone slow down and listen. That night she wrote in her journal, "Sometimes the loudest lessons come from the quietest places." A few days after the episode went viral, Whoopi's office was busier than ever. Reporters kept calling for interviews, fans sent letters of appreciation, and news channels around the world replayed the emotional moments from her talk show. Everyone was talking about the royal guard's quiet dignity and the lesson of patience he shared. Whoopi felt proud but also humbled. She knew that this moment was bigger than television fame. It was about respect, culture, and the beauty of understanding people who live differently. Still, she never expected what would happen next. One morning, Mark entered her office holding a white envelope with a gold seal. "This just arrived for you," he said with excitement. "It's from the royal palace." Whoopi looked surprised. From the palace? What could it be? She opened the envelope carefully and began to read. It was an official invitation from the royal family. They were inviting her to a private ceremony in London, where they planned to honor Thomas for representing the royal guards with great discipline and heart. The letter also thanked Whoopi personally for showing the world their story in such a kind and respectful way. For a moment, she sat quietly, touched by the words. Then she smiled. "Looks like we're going to London again, Mark." Mark laughed. "I hope this time no one mistakes us for tourists taking pictures of guards." A week later, Whoopi and her small team flew to London. When they arrived, the city looked even more beautiful than before. The streets were busy, the air was cool, and the palace stood tall with flags gently waving in the wind. The ceremony was set to take place in the royal garden, a quiet and graceful place filled with green lawns and colorful flowers. When Whoopi arrived, Thomas was already there, standing with his usual calm and gentle smile. He looked proud but humble, just as he always did. "Good to see you again, Thomas," Whoopi said warmly. He bowed slightly. "It's good to see you too, ma'am." "You've brought quite a lot of attention to us," she smiled. "It was all your doing, not mine. People saw something real in you." Before the ceremony began, the royal family's representative came forward to speak. "Today," he said, "we celebrate not only the discipline of our guards, but also the understanding shared between different worlds. Sometimes a single conversation can build a bridge where none existed before." Everyone clapped softly as Thomas received a medal for his service and for inspiring people across the world. Cameras flashed, but he remained still, as calm as ever. Whoopi watched with quiet admiration. She knew that the world needed more people like him, steady, humble, and wise in silence. After the event, Thomas walked up to her. "Thank you, ma'am," he said politely. "You didn't just tell my story. You helped people respect what we do." Whoopi shook her head lightly. "No, Thomas. You did that by just being yourself." They both stood for a moment, watching the garden and the people celebrating around them. There was peace in the air. The same peace Whoopi had felt during that silent moment when she first saw him standing guard in London. Later that evening, she was invited inside the palace for tea. The setting was elegant but welcoming. She sat across from the same official who had sent her the invitation. The man smiled kindly. "Miss Whoopi, the royal family deeply appreciated the way you shared this story. It reminded the world that even in today's fast life, discipline, patience, and silence still have great value." Whoopi nodded. "I think people were hungry for that reminder. Everyone runs fast these days. Sometimes it takes a quiet person to make us all slow down." As she left the palace later that night, she looked back one last time. The guards stood in perfect stillness under the soft lights. Tourists took pictures, children pointed in wonder, and yet those guards never moved. Whoopi smiled to herself. "They really are something else," she whispered. On the flight home, Mark turned to her and said, "I never thought we'd get invited to the palace because of a laugh." Whoopi laughed softly. "That's life, Mark. Sometimes laughter opens the door to lessons you never planned to learn." As the plane flew over the dark clouds, she opened her journal again and wrote, "When respect meets understanding, the world becomes smaller and kinder." She didn't know it yet, but this was not the end of the story. Something even more beautiful was waiting when she returned home. When Whoopi returned home from London, she felt a calmness she hadn't felt in years. The trip had changed something inside her. She had gone there as a talk show host, but she returned as someone who had learned the quiet beauty of discipline and respect. Her office welcomed her with flowers, letters, and gifts from people who had watched the show. Many of them were from schools, saying that teachers had shown the interview to students to teach them about patience, humility, and respect. Some were from parents who said their children were inspired by Thomas's calm nature. Mark placed another stack of letters on her desk and said, "You've become a global teacher now." Whoopi smiled softly. "I didn't teach anyone. I just shared what I saw." Over the next few weeks, she was invited to several events, but one special invitation stood out. It was from a school in New York City that wanted her to speak about the experience she had with the Royal Guard. They wanted to call it "The Power of Quiet Strength." When the day came, the auditorium was full of students, teachers, and even parents. Whoopi stood on stage holding the microphone, looking at hundreds of young faces waiting to hear her story. She began with a gentle smile. "I used to think that power only comes from speaking loud, standing tall, or making people laugh. But then I met a man who said nothing at all, and he changed the way I see strength." The students listened closely as she told them about her trip to London, about how she laughed at the guard, and how he remained calm and polite. She spoke about the moment when he shared the story of his father, who taught him that discipline was not about control, but about self-respect. Then she looked at the students and said, "We live in a world full of noise. Everyone wants to speak, to be heard, to be seen. But sometimes, the most powerful people are the ones who stay calm and steady. They listen, they wait, and they act when it truly matters. The hall became silent. Every word she said seemed to touch the young hearts in front of her. After the speech, a small boy walked up to her with shy eyes and said, "Miss Whoopi, I used to get angry when people teased me, but now I'll try to stay calm like the guard." Whoopi smiled and patted his shoulder. "That's the best thing you could ever do, my dear." That night, when she returned home, she opened her laptop and saw an email from Thomas. He had written only a few lines, but they carried deep meaning. He wrote, "Thank you for showing the world that quiet hearts can be strong too. The palace has been flooded with kind messages." "I'm grateful," Whoopi replied warmly. "You taught me that silence isn't empty. It's full of meaning. Thank you, my friend." Weeks passed, but the story of the royal guard continued to travel across the world. News channels still showed small clips of that one moment, when Whoopi laughed and then stood still, realizing what true discipline looked like. It had become a symbol of respect between different worlds. One afternoon, Whoopi was sitting on her balcony, sipping tea while the sun slowly set behind the city skyline. Mark joined her with a new magazine in hand. On the cover was a picture of Thomas standing proudly at the palace gates, and the headline read, "The Guard Who Taught the World to Listen." Mark smiled and said, "You see? It's not just a story anymore. It's a lesson the whole world is learning." Whoopi looked at the picture and nodded. "Yes, and I'm glad I was there to witness it." She thought about how everything had started with a simple laugh, one small mistake that turned into something beautiful. Life had a strange way of teaching people lessons. Sometimes the most meaningful lessons came when you least expected them. As evening fell, she closed her eyes for a moment and whispered softly, "Thank you, Thomas," somewhere in London. A guard stood tall and silent, unaware that his quiet strength had touched hearts around the globe. He did not speak, but his message had already been heard everywhere. That night, Whoopi wrote her final note in her journal. Respect can begin with laughter and end with understanding. The quiet ones are not forgotten. They are the steady light in a noisy world. And with that thought, she smiled, feeling peaceful. The story that began with laughter had ended with wisdom. It was no longer about fame or shows. It was about humanity, kindness, and the beauty of silence.